Hello and welcome back to another edition of Press Pass on GNAT-TV. I'm Andrew McKeever, the news director at GNAT-TV's News Project. It's a pleasure to have you with us today on Thursday, May 9th. It's also a great pleasure to be joined by two of the journalists who are in charge of the Middlebury Campus, the Middlebury College newspaper. And as we all know, many college campuses around the country these past couple of weeks have been, going through a bit of unrest and whatnot over the Gaza situation and tent encampments that have been erected on several of the college campuses. To bring us up to speed on what's been going on, we're really pleased to have with us today Maggie Reynolds, who is the editor-in-chief of the Middlebury Campus, and also Katie Futterman, the managing editor. Maggie, Katie, great to have you with us today. Thank you very much for making the time for this conversation.
Yeah, thank you for having us as well. We're excited to be here.
It's been very fascinating to me to follow all the developments on the various college campuses around the country. If I may say so, it took me back a bit to my own college days back at UVM back in the early 1970s, and we'll leave that there. But anyway, I guess I just wondered, just to kind of get us started, if you could kind of, like I say, bring us up to speed on where things are at in Middlebury. My understanding is that the tent encampments were folded up earlier this week, but what's going on?
Students took down the physical encampments on this Monday around 12 p.m. when they did that at the same time that the administration sent a statement that agreed to some demands and pledged future negotiations. I believe it was an agreed upon situation beforehand that that would happen at the same time, the statement and taking down the physical encampment. And then there is just continued negotiations.
Yeah, so like kind of a major part of the taking down the tents and like the moving forward is that the protesters agreed that they wouldn't have the physical encampment anymore because the college sent that statement. But our Student Government Association released a referendum getting a sense from the student body of people's attitude toward like financial transparency on the college investment and divestment from like holdings in arms manufacturing. And the Board of Trustees is meeting like tomorrow into this weekend. And so the protesters and people from the SGA who have the results of that referendum are going to be meeting with the Board of Trustees. So I think that was kind of a big part of the timing of like the protesters being willing to take down the encampment with those future negotiations like in mind.
So, do you feel like the administration's response was an appropriate one, an adequate one, or is there still some sense that some of the demands are kind of left unmet or uncertain?
Yeah, I think the statement, one of the most clear demands was just for Middlebury to call for a ceasefire, which Middlebury did in its statement. And then as for the other demands, I would say that none of the like written statement was like fully meeting them. But what the protesters told us is that that was like part of the agreement to like pledge for future negotiations, and that the statement wasn't necessarily like they kind of knew going in that it wasn't going to like fully like say that we're absolutely divesting or anything like that, but that it did like promise future work on it. And they're still like the protesters still consider themselves to be protesting, I guess, even though don't have their physical set up.
So is there any concern that the graduation ceremonies or commencement exercises that'll be coming up, I guess, fairly soon, will they be able to go forward as usual, or is there some concern about that?
I think at this point, given that the encampment has disbanded and graduation isn't for 2 weeks, I don't think we have a sense now that there's any reason that like commencement will be changed at all. The protesters were on McCullough Lawn, which is where our commencement usually is. So I guess had they stayed, maybe there would have been some more talk of that. But right now the protesters seem committed to like negotiations outside of the physical encampment with the administration, the Board of Trustees. Yeah.
It sounds like Middlebury had a more generally, what's the right word here, calmer or peaceful demonstration than some of the other college campuses we've been hearing about, like Dartmouth or Columbia or the University of Southern California and UCLA, and also, for that matter, UVM. I mean, what do you attribute that to? Was there better communication going on right from the start between the protesters and the administration, do you think, or were there some other factors involved in that?
Yeah, I think that assessment is accurate. I think we got a sense, like we went and talked to the protesters the first morning. It was Sunday, I think April 28th, that they pitched their tents, and like our public safety on campus, like talked to some of the protesters that morning, and they both sides established that they weren't breaking any like serious college rules. Like the college's free expression policy like permitted them to be protesting. The only rule was like from our like residential life saying that your students aren't supposed to be camping on campus. But other than that, I think there was like a pretty concerted effort on both sides to like keep things within college policies, and like the students started meeting with administrators like a day after the protests began, and we're in like pretty, at least our impression, pretty like productive conversations. So there was never an escalation of like violence or like trying to discipline the students like unfairly or unnecessarily from the college administration.
Yeah, I think one of the components of that was that our like the big student group, Students for Justice in Palestine, had been working with the administration, had been like developing relationships with the administration throughout the year. Like some of them had commented to us that they had better relations than they thought at other schools. So I think going into it, there was an established relationship. And then I can't comment on other schools besides what I've read, but I mean, I can certainly speak for Middlebury in that it was just organized like extremely well and extremely carefully. And by the time they were setting up, they had like, yeah, like Maggie said, they had read the handbook, they knew all the rules, and they were definitely making an effort to not break any rules on purpose. And that was probably something that ended up being beneficial to that relationship in the long run. But then everything, they had like documents upon documents, studied everything, and had really, really carefully organized the encampment.
I would also add to that, like kind of with that organization, they had a system of like green, yellow, and red zones of protesters, and they like established like within themselves, like people who were in the red zone were prepared for like to be suspended or any other like disciplinary action, and they would stay like protesting until that happened. And then people in the yellow zone were like not would stay until there was a threat of like disciplinary action, and then green was kind of people who would come and go from the encampment. And that wasn't something that we heard of really at other schools. So I think, yeah, like Katie said, really a lot of like thought and organization that went into the protesters' side of things and how they would approach it.
So, what was it like covering it? I enjoyed reading all the stories that you published. I read them on your website there. You did several stories about it. What was the biggest challenge to covering this, though? I imagine, for instance, you probably knew some of the protesters. Was it did that make it easier to kind of get sort of an inside view of that, or were you still kind of having to kind of go from person to person and talk to each one and kind of get a sense as to, where things were headed?
Yeah, I would say it was a mixed bag. Like knowing the students helped in the sense that, as soon as we saw it go up on Sunday, we were able to just like shoot a text to one of the organizers that we had talked to a lot throughout the year about different movements. But I would say it was also presented sort of a challenge in just the awkwardness of being a student reporter. And I think we've both encountered this a little bit in the past, but this was probably, for me at least, the biggest example of that, just like going in and being such kind of like an outside force, but it's your own school and your own peers and friends. And I think that relationship was difficult. How much could they talk to us just as a friend, and how much could they talk to us as reporters? And like at one point they gave us like press vests to have, so that like other students would know that we were the press, because otherwise they would just think we were students. So that was definitely I would say a difficult relationship there.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was definitely, like Katie said, different from anything that we had really covered in terms of like typically when we're talking to students, it's in a more positive or less like kind of intense way. And I think we're used to like having some more like sometimes serious or yeah, conversations with like administrators where maybe we're not coming at things from the same side, but typically with students, I don't think we had this dynamic. And yeah, so it was just interesting to navigate like wanting to get as much information as we could from students and from the administrative side and people having different attitudes towards like the press and like how much they wanted to tell us. And yeah, also just a lot of like we go to a really small school, so there was a lot of like rumors circulating about like developments happening or like people would reach out to us and give us like a tip of something that was going on that maybe wasn't true. And just kind of a lot of like circulating things that it was interesting to navigate that relationship of like having known people not in a like press context and then having to be like, we're reporters now, you're like just a different like relationship, I guess.
Yeah, and beyond that relationship, I also it's difficult because we're a weekly print paper who primarily like post things in print and then online as well after. But it was difficult because this kind of popped up in the middle of two issues, and it didn't feel like something that could wait to report on until from Sunday to Thursday. So we had to kind of act very quickly and write that day and get used to more of like a breaking news cycle, and had to have conversations about, you know, what's the best way to cover this? Should we keep like coming back? And we ended up kind of just going back and checking in and writing a lot of follow-up stories and then not putting all of those in print. But that was new for a lot of us who had gotten used to the weekly cycle. So getting used to like online posting was it was a fun experience, but it was difficult. And obviously we're students approaching finals, so we were also managing schoolwork and classes, which was not easy.
Yeah, I can't imagine what that must be like. I mean, that whole business of posting online, you know, as stuff is happening is very challenging, very requires a lot of time and effort, and to be doing that in addition to kind of preparing a weekly print version is that's a lot. And yeah, and then you have finals coming up, right? Plus, you've also had another kind of major story going on at the same time. The Middlebury College president is stepping down and moving on to a new job. I mean, ordinarily that would have been a big deal headline story, but I mean, with everything else going on, that was probably hard to kind of, you know, kind of get the full word out on that as well.
Yeah, we had kind of a flurry of things happening at once last week. It was probably, like Katie said, our most like breaking news week. We do a like zeitgeist issue every year, which is like we do a survey of the student body to get kind of gauge attitudes towards like academics, social life, like resources on campus, things like that. And then we do a bunch of visualization and write up a whole report on zeitgeist. And so that was coming out last week. We had it was like the first 4 days or so of the encampment and kind of trying to figure out our coverage of that. And then we found out that President Patton was resigning and or not resigning, leaving to go to the Academy of Arts and Sciences. And so yeah, just having like all of those breaking stories, and definitely that Lori story would have been like a lot of a bigger deal, I think, if it hadn't been amidst all of the other things that we were covering. But yeah, it was definitely unique to be doing so much writing and posting online the same day and trying to get people to like realize that we were kind of shifting to like a breaking news daily, like VT Digger type style for a little bit to meet the like news last week. Yeah.
And how many reporters are on your staff? I mean, how it seems like you have a team of what, at least half a dozen people or so, as far as I could tell. Is that about right?
Yeah, so we have a group of editors and then writers. What is it, like 40 total?
Yeah, I would say like our whole staff, including like layout editors and online editors and copy editors, photographers, is like a little bit under 60 people. But we have our 5 like main sections are news, local, arts and culture, opinion, sports, and each of those has maybe 4 editors. So I guess like, yeah, 25-ish editors, and then we have some people who write for the campus periodically that aren't like officially on our staff.
One of the aspects of the demonstrations that have been happening around the country over the last few weeks around this that's been interesting to me, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it, is the whole question around what the boundary line is on free speech versus, well, what's the right word? Hate speech, or speech that goes beyond the pale of being, free and okay, but tips into a more dangerous area. I wondered, did that come up at all in the course of your conversations with not only with with the rest of your staff, but also with the students you were talking to at the encampment? Did they have a sense that, okay, we can go this far, but if we go farther, then we're kind of getting into a kind of dangerous territory here?
Yeah, I would say it wasn't as large a deal here at Middlebury, the specifics of speech, as I've seen it at other colleges. We talked about like, I mean, I know one of the controversial phrases that people have talked about is like from the river to the sea. And at Middlebury, that is considered protected speech. And that was a slogan that was at the encampment a lot, spoken about and signs about. And definitely anecdotally, we've heard like student concerns about that phrase or about other things. But I would say the speech component was a lesser deal at Middlebury. There definitely were discussions about like specific ways that certain things were worded and certain times where the encampment like shifted their wording, or when something was kind of misunderstood a bit. But I would really commend like both those at the encampment and student body in general were definitely having a lot of like open conversation, and it was very like inclusive environment and a lot of open conversation about anything that could be misconstrued or anything.
Yeah, and I think there was a pretty big focus among the organizers of the encampment on like having like educational programming and like workshops and conversations about like things happening in like the Israel Gaza like area, and also like talking about phrases like that and like combating anti-Semitism and like history of the conflict and things like that I think they made an effort to make people feel included and combat like anti-Semitism. I think it didn't necessarily succeed among everyone, and we definitely have heard from people who did not feel comfortable with it. But yeah, I wouldn't say there was as much conversation around like free speech here outside of that phrase, and it was more kind of about like educational efforts and that kind of thing.
So do you think going forward this is going to be looked back on as sort of a potentially divisive situation that happened at the school, or will it be sort of more likely to be viewed as, hey, during a moment, an important historical moment, the students kind of, hey, stepped up and, made their voices heard, but within sort of the boundaries of what would be a good way to get their feelings and their message out.
Yeah, I don't think it'll be looked back on something divisive at all. I think people pretty across the board feel positively about the outcome of the encampment in terms of that there was never an escalation to violence. There were productive conversations between the students involved and the administration, and they reached an agreement with the statement and kind of are moving forward from there. I think, yeah, another thing that we've definitely on our newspaper staff talked about quite a bit is like prior to this whole encampment, we had been thinking about a lot of the like political engagement at Middlebury in the past that had been pretty like notable, such as like following the Charles Murray, like him coming to Middlebury in 2017, I think, or maybe that was 2019. And like protests to divest from fossil fuels and our like Energy 2028 initiative, and how like there's been a lot of student engagement around those things. But since the beginning of the COVID like pandemic, we hadn't seen like as much political engagement, and just wondering about if Middlebury students were still like interested in that and had that like as their focus. And I think we have felt like this kind of answered that question and did so in a way that was pretty like productive and got conversations going in a positive way.
One of your stories I found most interesting was the one about the People's University there. Some professors wanted to have classes at the encampment. Did that ever work out, or was that shut down?
Yeah, I had a class at the encampment. but I don't believe there were very many classes there. I believe like the first few days, maybe very few professors had classes there. And at least my professor, and from what I've heard, were like kind of open to students if they did not want to come. They were completely like excused, and they held like votes about like whether the class wanted to go a lot. But yeah, the administration did end up deciding to like prohibit like tell faculty not to bring classes there, and make some other rules about like how to discuss the encampment in classes, which yeah, we talked about as a staff as something that could just make decisions less difficult for students and faculty, so that no one felt uncomfortable or forced.
So I was wondering, you both had some experience with other publications outside of the Middlebury campus. And I guess I just wanted to maybe pivot a little bit away from what you saw the last couple of weeks at Middlebury, and kind of get your thoughts on sort of the bigger picture of journalism and the journalism industry going forward. I mean, are you both thinking that maybe once you graduate, you'd like to go into the news business in some way? Well, let me start there. Is that something you're both seeing as, at least step one after graduation?
Yes,
Yes.
I'd say so.
Yeah.
So as you both know, then, I mean, obviously the news industry has been changing a tremendous amount over certainly the past 20 years or so. I guess what are your feelings about how the industry is evolving and changing? It seems to me, from the outside that we get so much more information, or a lot of people seem to get their information from social media sources that may or may not be reliable. I mean, how do you see yourselves, for instance, and the news industry in general, kind of navigating its way to providing information that people can read and trust in an environment that, gosh, compared to, let's say, 30 years ago, was totally different?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think like the speed of information has been like a huge component. Kind of what we talked about earlier about doing a weekly paper at the same time as online. We've heard that from a guest speaker we talked to from the Economist, and as well as I know like that's something 7 Days in Vermont thinks about as well. But definitely among my peers, I would say there's been more discussion about like more distrust of what I guess people would consider like mainstream media, and more kind of leaning towards like alternative sources. And I've found that interesting, and kind of struggled with that, and am not, I mean, I can't give you a good answer about the future, but I am curious about that, and especially young people, how they get their information is definitely a lot less of like I'm going to read the New York Times today, and a lot more like looking at Instagram or watching a YouTube video or something, which I think is interesting.
Yeah. I would also say, like you said about the I don't know, the Vermont news landscape, I guess, I think is pretty unique. And we both have experience with like newspapers in Vermont. And I think I've been very like, I didn't know that like coming to Middlebury and like ending up being involved with other newspapers in Vermont would be such a like formative experience. But I think like the way 7 Days does a weekly print newspaper that's very robust, and then VT Digger's model of like posting really breaking stories online like throughout the day are both like different than kind of the typical like daily print newspaper that we maybe think of as being sort of moving towards being outdated or not working with the times. And so I think I've been struck by like the way those newspapers have been able to be successful still and like innovate in their model. And that has like made me very interested in like journalism in Vermont, and also kind of given me some hope for the future of journalism.
Yeah, we've both certainly been very lucky to have benefited from working in Vermont newsrooms, because like Maggie said, the local journalism scene here I think is really exceptional, and it's been great that we've gotten to like intern and be like treated almost like a regular reporter in the summers. Has been a really great experience for sure.
Yeah, and I would also say it's really helpful to our reporting with the campus as well to have connections to like professional journalists in the state who give us some like advice sometimes, or give us like tips on stories, and it feels like collaborative in a way that I can't imagine not having that part being like in somewhere that's like a lot bigger or like less of a community. So it definitely helps our reporting.
Yeah, well, it's certainly interesting times for sure on that. One last question I just wanted to run by you before we have to run here. There's a certain debate, I guess is the right word, within some journalistic circles about whether or not news stories should be crafted with the idea of sort of explaining sort of both sides of the story, as it were. You give, you're the objective, lens through which this information is coming through, and that it's important to kind of say, well, on the one hand, these folks feel this way, on the other hand, these folks feel that way, and you're just sort of providing that information. Versus the notion that a newspaper or a journalist should also maybe I won't say take a side, but should point out when one side is giving out information that is factually inaccurate, and that should be called out as being factually inaccurate and incorrect and what have you. I guess I just wondered if either you have, kind of either struggled with that or thought about it, or where do you land? Because your stories seem to be, very much like you're trying to kind of give all sides of the story here. You're trying to give a voice to, your administration and as well as the students. But I guess I just wondered if you have any feelings around that.
Yeah, I certainly have feelings about it. Kind of what I was sort of similar to what I was saying earlier about, I think that I've heard a lot of my peers be frustrated, why are news sources pretending to be objective about issues that really don't feel objective? And that's something I've struggled with a lot. Like when I feel very passionately about an issue, or to me, it doesn't seem like, it's should be objective, but I really, I don't know if it's old school, but I like definitely feel like there's a really important place for like attempting to be as objective as possible and to give like different sides voices. I think one of the hardest things about writing for news is trying to be objective, but also trying to like point out kind of to what you're saying, a factual inaccuracy too. So I've we'll give a quote and then like explain the fact as well below. And we had a story this week where that was a very big deal. But I certainly feel like there is still a place, and a really, really important place, for trying to give a voice to all sides of an issue, at least so that people can hear where the other side is coming from, if not like pretending to agree or anything.
Yeah, I agree. I think also there's definitely a need for objectivity, at least as much as possible. I don't really think anyone can be fully objective. I think that like when we get a tip for a story, or like if we come up with an idea ourselves, we probably come in with some preconceived notions of whatever the story is that we're trying to tell. But I agree, letting the facts like speak for themselves as much as possible, and then supplementing with other like objective, accurate information is the best way to go about things. I think another thing that we try to really impress upon like writers here and do ourselves is reaching out to all sides, all people that could have like a relevant voice or relevant information to provide in a situation, and like, yeah, making the best effort we can to include all those perspectives, like including both administrators and students from different sides of a story, and maybe like faculty or staff as well. I think that's definitely been a learning process. And yeah, I know I definitely, when I have certain attitudes towards a story, maybe will find myself picking specific quotes from like interviews I've done that maybe paint one side in a different picture than the other. But just like, I guess being aware of that tendency and working to, yeah, be as objective as possible, because I don't think that we have as like valuable of a role if we're not trying to be informative and fair to all sides.
Yeah, that's also why we've talked a little bit about this year about how we have different sections. So a lot of times in the same newspaper, we'll have news sources and then we'll have opinions about those news. And I think that has also been really valuable to like really distinguish between those two things. But yeah, also agreeing with what Maggie said about reaching out to everyone. That's one of the things I've really been surprised about. It was like how many people who you wouldn't think would want to talk to you about something are willing to talk. And that's been something, even though it's really scary sometimes to reach out to people, but it's been good.
Yeah, I would also add one more thing on that point about the different sections. We've definitely had an experience, specifically this like spring semester, of kind of learning about people in our school communities, like level of knowledge about what an opinion section is, what's a news section, like how could you have pieces that are objective and also pieces that state an opinion at the same time. And so I think that's been like a valuable experience to learn about people's preconceived ideas of what a newspaper does and what's objective and what isn't, and trying to make clear both through like some editorial content, like what we're intending to do with the different sections and how a newspaper works. And yeah, just like think that those are the different opinions and news sections are both really important parts of like journalism. And yeah, just I guess working through that kind of dynamic.
Well, you both and your entire team done a tremendous job. I think it's been fascinating to me to read your website and go through it and follow your stories. Job well done, I would say. You both deserve a lot of credit for your coverage of what I'm sure was a fairly dramatic couple of weeks up on the campus. So good job, and I'm sure there's going to be some journal outlet somewhere that will be very grateful to have you on their staff in the years to come.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. That's very nice.
Well, we'll have to leave it there for today. Gosh, I'd love to keep this conversation going for a while longer, but we're going to have to run there. So I just wanted to thank again Maggie Reynolds, the editor-in-chief of the Middlebury Campus, and Katie Futterman, the managing editor. Thank you both for being with us today and bringing your perspective to this, very important story. And thanks to all of you who have been with us as well. We hope you found the program interesting, and we'll see you again the next time. Take care.